Welcome to the Landy Peak podcast. I'm your host and friend, Landy Peak, and I am thrilled to have you join me. In each episode, we will explore what makes life truly fulfilling: happiness, deep connections, and self-discovery. Together, we'll uncover that happiness is not a destination, but a way of living. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello there, friends. This is Landy Peak, and welcome to this episode of the Landy Peak podcast. We're continuing an incredible series called Me in the Middle. In this series, over the next few weeks, we are going to dive into all those wild and wonderful changes life throws our way in our fabulous 40s. You know those moments when you look in the mirror and you're not quite sure if you recognize yourself, saying, wait, who am I anymore? We're getting into the heart of perimenopause, those sneaky identity shifts or identity crisis, the joys and chaos of parenting, and the roller coaster ride of caring for aging parents. I mean, who really warned us about juggling all of these hats at once? It's like 1 minute you're conquering the world, and the next you're trying to remember why you walked into the room. So why not tackle these challenges together? In each episode, we will talk to an incredible woman just like you who is surviving this crazy time of life. We'll share stories, advice, a few laughs, possibly a few tears. And it's all about finding that sweet spot in the middle of this beautiful mess of life. So get comfy, grab a cup of something delightful, and let's chat like old friends, figuring out this 40s thing together. I'd like to welcome our next guest. Welcome, Nicole. I am so excited to have you here. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, my name's Nicole, like Landy said, and I currently live in Seattle, Washington, but I'm transitioning to a small mountain town, which I'm very excited about, getting back closer to my roots as a small town mountain person. I have two little kids that are 4 and 6, and when I'm not hanging with them and doing all that, I also have my own physical therapy practice that specializes in pregnancy and postpartum support.
When I put out that I am looking to speak with people about being me in the middle, you raised your hand and said, I'd love to chat. So can you tell me a little bit about where you are in life and how you perceive yourself as being me in the middle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm well, maybe coming out a little bit of the middle. I think, I don't know. You don't know where the middle is, right? Maybe till you're in the middle. I had kids slightly later, around 35 for both of my kids, and I'm 41 now. And I think this transition from, I think like so many people that have kids, that experience just kind of like rocks your world in like the best and like the worst ways. And, really challenged my identity and sense of self, of course, which were things that were there before, but then the transition into motherhood, my timing was unfortunate relative to the beginning of the pandemic was when my second daughter was born. And just again, for many of us, that created this catalyst to look at our lives and figure out what's going on. And I think, for me, December of 2020, my second was 8 months old, and I just hit rock bottom, and I had this really vivid image on New Year's Eve of me being in the water, drowning, and waves just drowning, and my husband being who's a great guy, but being up on this mountaintop, so far away that he couldn't even see what was happening. And that was really, I think, a turning point for me of realizing this is not sustainable, and it feels really bad. So that has taken me, now here we are at the end of 2024. That has taken me kind of the last 4 years has taken me on this journey to figure out, really in many ways, for the first time ever, who am I really. And I think maybe it was in 2022 that I was sort of like, I am on a quest to like find my authentic self. And I
Mm-hmm.
had peers who were like, what does that even mean? And I was like, I have no idea. But like I know that this like version of myself is not the version of myself that existed 30 years ago. And so I've sort of been on a journey to kind of figure that out. And I do not have all the answers yet, but I think I am on the right path. And I think for me, like I turned 40, I guess, like a year and a half ago. And, so many people look at turning 40 as this like thing to be dreaded, like you're over the hill, it's like downhill. And I think like that year for me of like turning 40 and then sort of on this way was like really one of the best years I've had in a long time. And so I think like I may be on the like coming out of the like bottom on the upswing of that being stuck in the middle and feeling like, yeah, I'm moving through. And I guess I was just sort of inspired to like, it's always helpful to know that you're not going through something alone. And so much of this, I mean, I think the like female experience, but also the like motherhood experience is just like, you're not alone, but it also feels so isolating. Um,
Absolutely.
because you sort of think you have to be the only one that's feeling the way that you're feeling. And even
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, that was sort of what, yeah, got me to hit reply.
I love that. And it is. I think so many of what we feel are our deepest, darkest secrets are the most common things that people are dealing with. And it's
Totally.
that feeling of, I know that little kid motherhood where you're feeling so isolated and it is so hard to just get out and do anything and meet anybody. And it's overwhelming. And it does really shift and play with your identity. And we lose ourselves. And like for me, I let go of all of the things that I really loved and built me up, like hobbies. And it just be like, what can I cram in into the little time that I have? And, self-care is now sitting in the bathroom eating chocolate because I don't have any other space to do it. We have
Hmm.
kids that are constantly needing attention. And we have careers that we're focusing on that are vying for our attention, and spouses that we're vying for our attention, and external family that's vying for our attention, and social connections, and so many things that it's really easy to forget. And I don't even know it's forget. Like you said, maybe we never even knew who we
Hmm.
were or who we really are because we get lost in all of the stuff.
Yeah. 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 I think there's that. And like, it's so much right now is this like, it feels isolating. And it's both like, we've created that from a culture, from this sense of like independence and like, and as women, we're like, well, I can do anything. And I can, like, we're kind of the first generation really that has like, I mean, yes, there are still like limitations, but compared to like, our mother's generation, like we have so much opportunity, but there's almost been this whiplash to like, well, I should be able to do it all on my own. And this like reluctance to ask for help and like the isolation just feels like it like breeds this isolation, you don't want to be a burden on somebody. You don't want to like, my mantra for like so long, my husband traveled a lot for work, just when thankfully when we just had one, was like, I can do hard things,
Mhm.
and I very much was like, well, yeah, I can, I was single parenting 5 days a week. And I was like, and people would say like, well, like, how are you doing that? And I was like, well, I can do hard things, and it was like, but that was very much my like, and of course, as I look back, like that's been a mantra for a long time, but just this like, well, I can do it by myself. Like, should I be doing it by myself? Like, no. But like, am I? Yes. And I feel like so many of us women fall into this, like, we don't want to ask for help because it makes us seem weak and, less than. And then it just creates this like isolation that we just like, it's like a self perpetuating isolation. And there's so much around like, I don't know, sometimes when I think back to like my childhood and like my mom and like her peers at that time, like, I don't know. I guess it was like partly the 80s. And of course, everything in hindsight looks like better. But it was like, I don't know, they weren't super like as attached to like sleep schedules and like, I'd fall asleep, I think like at a very young age, like at my like friend's house, but really it was my mom's best friend's house because like they were hanging out and there was just this like, like they just didn't, I don't know, whatever it was. And I, yes, was like, grew up in like a small town and not in the city, but like, I remember talking, like messaging a friend and being like, you are literally 3 blocks away. And we are both just like sitting in our houses feeling lonely by ourselves.
Hmm.
I don't know. Why didn't one of us just be like, I'm coming over with my baby and like they'll fall asleep, let me bring the little sleep space for them. I'll bring the pack and play and like let's hang out, but I think there's so many layers to that makes it feel like so isolating and like such a loss of like then we're doing it on our own and it like then takes us farther away from like other people and like connections and I don't know where I got on that tangent, but I don't know. I just feel like there's this like independence has sort of gotten the better of us over this like in our generation a little bit.
I completely agree. And
Yeah.
I can see it in myself as you're describing it, and definitely felt it, where I, like you, have that mentality of, well, I can do hard things. I have said that many, many times. I have pushed myself through things, and it's almost a badge of honor if I don't ask for help. If I
Yes.
prove that I can do this, then there is something validating about it, but there isn't. I just
Right.
really hard all by myself, and nobody said, "Oh my gosh, Landy, you did it all by yourself. Congratulations." There's no pat on the back. I just got really, really tired and more isolated. And I can see it even in my own personal marriage relationship, looking at, I can do it and I will push and make sure that I'm the one doing it and don't ask, even though I know if I ask, I will receive help. And that is something that I have worked on and shifted somewhat. It is not supportive and it's not helpful in any way, shape, or form, but it is definitely something that I have pushed.
Yeah. And then it just actually creates resentment because you're like, why am I doing this all on my own? Like, I want my partner to help. But then you're sort of like, but I can do it on my own. And like, it's almost like you're proving to yourself, but also like somehow proving to your spouse that like you don't need them. I don't know. It's just such a weird thing. Like, I mean, I remember like forever ago, one of the things that like stood out from like the time that, we worked together was this like, I want you, but I don't need you. And like just how like profound. And like I've sort of pulled that into like other, like with other relationships, but also like other things of like, well, I want this thing, but I don't need it. And like just shifting that like perspective has been just like really helpful for me. And this like, okay. And then there's some things that you're like, oh, I don't need this. And I actually don't want it,
Right?
And like
Yeah.
that's like really great clarity too. I mean, I remember having like in a like an acquaintance relationship that I was like, I actually don't want this. Like, I definitely don't need it and I don't want it. And like, I think that's part of this like realization of like also like that you can say no to things. And there's so much of that out there right now of like, just say no to the party, just say no to like the things, but then like saying no to the things that like is are going to upset somebody else too, or like someone's response is going to be like, I can't believe you're not volunteering for the PTA or like whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, I just don't want to do that. And like, and then people judge you for those things, but just being like, it's just like, so I've kind of come back to that, like, well, I actually don't want this and I don't need it. And then like other things like, oh, but can I do art in my son's classroom? Like, yeah, I can do that. Like do I need to do it? No, but do I want like does my son really care if I never came to his classroom? No. But do I want to do it? Like, yeah. And so that's been like just a fun, helpful way for me to get out of this sort of martyrdom that we put ourselves in. Of like I'm doing all the things and I have to do all the things to be whatever, the best mom, but like can't be a good mom if I'm doing all the things.
And that's huge. We can't be good at whatever we want to do if we're doing
Right.
things. And I
Yeah.
love to have used that. I want it, but I don't need it. in all aspects of your life. And in it,
Hmm.
I don't want this and I don't need this. That is definitely a no.
Right.
We need to normalize, I don't want to. And that's
Hmm.
okay. Because
Yeah.
we get that feeling of judgment and pressure that, oh my gosh, I really don't want to do this. But, that guilt trip into we end up doing it and it drains our energy. I love that how you've reframed it. And we used it together in a relationship sense,
Yes. Yep.
but it does apply in so many different areas. And so, for the listener at home, being able to hold something and really look at it and saying, do I want this and do I need this? And we looked at this as separation, a way to separate out, those feelings of want and need. And it's a great tool to really hold in your hand and say, do I want this and do I need this? And if I don't want it and I don't need it, let's let it go.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
love that. And
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
art in your son's classroom, but not
Yes.
yay, because I'm doing the
Yes.
same. Like, I want to do art on Fridays because it's fun and it's easy and it brings me joy, but I don't attend any PTA meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was like also one of these other things too of like I've had this story of like I'm not artistic and I'm not creative and like but like I like doing those things, and so it was like, well, yeah, I can look up online and find like a craft project to take into the first grade class. Like, and then it's fun and it's like so cool to see kids create and, then like I get a little bit of their like, oh, how are they creating things? And like, it's just fun to watch their process and stuff too,
It's,
before they get all these stories.
and that's it, because it is incredible and it is so fun. And I have a first grader and a fourth grader. And definitely between first grade and fourth grade, we have picked up a lot of stories.
Yeah.
Huge in how stifling those stories are. And
Hmm.
I don't know how to protect my younger one from getting those. I think that's part of growing and, our human journey. But it's
Yes.
fun to be in that atmosphere with little kids who are just really explorative and creative and really don't care what other people are going to think. And it brings me, at least, that same kind of energy as I leave that first grade classroom. I also have a first grade son. In this like creative energy of, oh my gosh, that's really fun. And it was messy. And we had a lot of, loud and all of these different things that just got to be. And I've lucked out with my son having a first grade teacher that really supports all of that. So I
Yeah.
can really go crazy. And she's like, this is awesome. Let's do this.
Yeah. It's fun. It's cool.
It is fun. So as you have looked, I really am interested in, if you're okay with it, diving more into this isolation, because I think we feel it early in motherhood,
Yep.
but also in the different stages as we're going. As I'm hitting perimenopause, definitely going, oh my gosh, all of these things that are happening. Like, I was the only one until I started talking to friends. And then they're like, oh yeah, that's me too. And
Hmm.
there is this shift age wise that happens as well as perimenopause. And I'd love to talk about more of that isolation, because I think you hit on a really important topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that because like I think again, it's sort of like early like parenthood is this like flashlight onto something that was already there, but like the tendrils of that were there before. Like if I think back, into my so like we moved to Seattle like 12 years ago. So just like if I think back, so we've lived here for a good chunk of time before we had kids and then a good chunk of time after. And if you think back to it, it's like, well, what did I do with my friends? Like, what were those relationships like? And like, if there's like was a lot of like going out to eat, and of course, like a lot of like enjoying really delicious cocktails, and then like, for us, like I had another subset of like women that I would run with, of course, like after work at like 7 p.m. And and like that was where a lot of my like relationship was built from, and a little bit of just like we spent a lot of time together, probably the addition of alcohol, like, a little bit of like social lubricant. And then, but as I've transitioned, right, a little bit of the like, okay, what were my hobbies? Like, those were kind of my hobbies, like eating out and like drinking good drinks and like moving my body and like being outdoors and stuff like. And then that but if I really think about those relationships, like there was some depth to them, but they weren't like super deep, right? Like if I think back, like when I first got pregnant, I didn't tell anybody, right? Because like those relationships didn't feel like safe spaces to share that in. So I think that there was like, I mean, love those people to death. Like I actually probably still have a connection with some of them, but there was this like lack of depth, I think, or at least in like what I want now and what I think of. And then we like go through this super isolating time, and then you meet people who are whose kids go to your same preschool, who, like, so you meet other women whose kids are going through the same thing. And like, and then yes, we're like connecting, but at least in my experience, it's been, and like I've met like some lovely, wonderful humans. So like not to like diminish those relationships, but so much of them is like, it's like 3 years down the road, and I'm like, I have no idea what she does for work. Right? Like,
Yeah.
all we do is honestly like get together and like we talk about our kids. And then there's like a little bit of this like bitch fest about like our partners and them
Mm-hmm.
not showing up the way that we want to do.
Yeah.
And that's sort of it. And like, so now for me at least, like, and like I'm still on a chat thread with like a lot of these women, and like we connect, but we connect over our kids. And I think like this next piece of isolation that like I'm currently feeling as like I sleep more and my kids have a little more independence, and I'm like starting to come out of that like really needy younger kid stage, is like I want like a space that I can like feel safe in and like held in and supported in for like all the like deep, dark, ugly, like both everything from like the weird things that are happening in my body to also like the emotional stuff that I'm going through. And I sort of find myself in this space of like feeling isolated again because the people that are in my life, because of course those friends from before kids that we like did big hikes and went out to restaurants, like those relationships have fizzled because like I'm not doing those things anymore. And we moved to opposite sides of the city, and like that's a
Mm-hmm.
barrier, right? So like that has sort of moved into the background. My current relationships are all about our kids, and really honestly like really disempowering circumstances because there's so much stress and angst and unhappiness around kids and partner. And then work is another piece for people that come in. But then that's like all we're talking about. Like we go to dinner and it's like people just take turns. And in some ways, it often becomes this like one-upmanship of like, oh, well, your husband did that. Well, mine did this, And of course, like we laugh. And as you look like retrospectively and when you're sharing the stories, like they're so ludicrous and ridiculous. And so there is that like genuine connection around that. But then there isn't anything underneath that. And that's not necessarily a fault to the other women or to myself. It's just that like that is what we were so entrenched in, that like we don't actually know anything about each other as
Right.
people, as individuals, like outside of this identity. And so like I'm finding myself in this place of like really craving what I am labeling as like sisterhood, because somehow to me that feels like deeper and more profound than, I don't know, like something else. But this like, as I've gone through this like moving the idea, it's like, I can't always just say to my husband, like, I am terrified and like or I don't like the way that you're like when I mean, I feel very grateful that I can talk to him about pretty much anything because thank God he's been doing his own inner work too. But like, I need somebody else. Like, we're not meant to live in isolation. And so I think like, I'm now into this like next layer of isolation. Like there are people in my world and I love them and care for them, but like I want something more.
Yes.
And that is a new form of like isolation, I guess.
I love that perspective that it's a new form of isolation because there is a lot to what you're saying. And I feel that and see that in my own life. As we have gone in little groups, I look back as you're taking us back to your past. I'm also looking at my past, and I have had a few set friends that I have gone deeper But for the majority of those relationships, they were very situational. And
Mm-hmm.
situational, we could talk about the situation, whether it's work, whether it's grad school, whatever it is, we can really bond over that. But once that situation is no longer there, then those friendships just fizzle. And then we go on to the next situation around being in the, mommy and me things. And again, as you're going, I don't know what all of those people, like the inner workings of those people's lives. And there was a pretty strong set of mommies and me's with my daughter that we all had a first baby and then we had our second, and many of them went on to have third, but we did everything together. But it was very superficial. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
kids. We're talking about the complaints of kids, the struggles with kids, sleep and eating and whatever it is. And then there's that parent layer that comes in. And as I have shifted to school age kids, it is now that same superficial friends that we're talking about the school age stuff. But there's
Mm-hmm.
very few of those deeper connections.
Mm-hmm.
And our partners are not meant to be, we're not meant to be for our partners everything. We're not meant to
Right.
be that soul relationship that supports all of the emotional needs. I don't think that's healthy for anyone. And I just know in my personal relationship that doesn't work. It's like
Totally. Yeah.
I have some more voices in there. And yes, like you, I can go a lot of places with my husband, pretty much anywhere, but that's not necessarily saying that that's healthy for us to go in there. He doesn't love in-depth chats over whatever I want to go in depth with.
Right.
My bestie will go with me there. And so
Yes.
I need that person that's thinking in the same way that I am, that will go into the deep thing and doesn't mind tears and, all of that good stuff. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really fascinating how you brought up all of our situational relationships, and that I'm like you, feeling isolated in that search for that deeper relationship, in that really being able to fill that deeper need, have those deeper level conversations where we can really show our authentic selves. And I think
Totally.
one of the reasons I love the work that you and I do when we're working with humans is because in our work, we can go deep, but it's not for us. Like,
Right. Yeah.
it's sitting in a space where it's okay to go deep, even though you and I don't get to go deep while we're sitting with clients. And that is isolating. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a fascinating thing for me, as like I hadn't really looked at where I am in life and all the situations and how isolating it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And and there's like, those people aren't superficial. We're all doing the same thing. And of course, then as you're saying this, I'm like, okay. And I've thought about this before, like how do you make that shift, right? Like within a peer group that exists, right? So like I have a group that I get together with once a month. We go out to dinner. We have been together since our first, sort of like you, first kids were born. And like I left one of those dinners being like feeling really just like that was not energizing at all.
Okay.
And this a little bit of this like, okay, but there, just like we've said, like we all think that we're like the only one who's experiencing that. But like maybe everyone else sitting on that table was also in this like same, and whether they've identified where they are on that like journey, feeling the same thing, but then it feels so like vulnerable and like a little bit of like scary. And to be like, okay, well, how do you then take, like, these are people that I enjoy spending time with, but I'm over the like, let's just sort through our stresses and our problems. Like, let's go deeper into these stresses and problems. But this, like, how do you take what you already have? Because I'm on one hand, I'm like, well, where do I find these people? How do I find these people that want to go deeper? And it's like, well, maybe they're in front of me, but then how do I? And this is like a question I haven't figured out, is like, what is a safe way to like explore, like, does this group of people that we already create space for each other once a month, like, can we go deeper, right? And like, of course, it's like everyone's on their own journey, and some people are at a space where they're like, actually no, whether they like
Absolutely.
consciously or subconsciously are just like, I can't go there, like I'm hanging on by a thread, but like I don't want to open Pandora's box, versus the people that are like, yeah, let's go a little deeper, so it's just sort of an interesting time, because I'm like, I don't know, do I need to join some like some women's circle that someone else is like creating, but then like also how do I fit that into my life? And like, because I still like these other, so it's just this really interesting space of like, I don't know. And a couple of times I've been like, well, what if I just like open up about myself and like see how that lands? And like for the most part, it's landed with crickets, and I'm like, okay, like, all right, well, I just like cracked the door a little bit. And in this moment, which doesn't mean that those people aren't ready to go there, that was not where they want to go. We're at a restaurant, like there's people. At this point, I'm like, I could cry in this restaurant and like I actually don't give a shit. But like not everybody's there, right? And I appreciate and don't fault anyone for that. But it's sort of this interesting, like, okay, if you want to go deeper, like where does one go? Right? Like a little bit of like, and I think that's a little bit of this like place that I'm at is like, I don't know, where do I go? Like, how do I move through this like phase? And like, we're going to move. And so, like, I don't want to end up just in these friendships again that are just because our kids happen to be in the same class or play on the same sports team. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes I think that can be an opportunity to meet. It is an opportunity to meet, but then making that intentional choice of like, do I want to, do we connect in a way that makes me want to go deeper and prioritize time with you, or am I happy to like chit chat with you on the sidelines of the hockey rink, but like I don't need to make more time. It's just sort of this interesting like,
But I totally feel it. And
yeah,
I think you have taken the tactic of just opening up. And there are times I have found one person in the last probably 3 years that was one of those situational things. Our kiddos were in preschool together, and they were great friends. So we hung out because the boys were friends.
yeah,
And I really liked her.
yeah,
And we started talking more. But it probably was 2 years into the relationship before it started shifting into, oh, wait, let's talk about, and I think it was an offhand, I'm trying to go back, an offhand comment by one of us in like the whole perimenopause thing. And oh my gosh. And I'm like, oh, yes, we're both in this same space. Let's talk about this, which took us away from talking about kids and husbands and into a little bit more. And our relationship has developed into something deeper where we can talk about a lot more, but it still has its situational type, boundaries there, where it's interesting to look at. And how
hmm,
do we
yeah,
find those? Because we are both craving it. How do we
right,
find a deeper level of friends? How do we go into a deeper level conversation with the people that we are in situational relationships with? I have last year in kindergarten, we had this really awesome room mom group. And I loved them. And we did a ton of stuff together. But this year, none of our kids are in the same class. We don't
right,
meet. And we'll
right,
pass each other at pickup and drop off, yet none of us text or call. And so those relationships have fizzled just because the situation has changed. And I definitely, as I look at them, they could be people that I could go deeper. So how do we shift into that? And it's an unknown, unanswered question.
right,
Shift into creating that. When if you and I, and probably the listener, is also feeling that craving, and probably
hmm,
your situational friends, how do we broach that topic? How do we shift into there? How do we
right,
open up the doors? Even if we're opening up ourselves, it doesn't necessarily mean time and space and place. It's going to be reciprocated. And
right,
sometimes there's that like shock of, ooh, we've changed the game here. And
hmm,
we're used to talking about this. And we've talked about this for the last, kids and husbands and whatever. And now you want to go deeper. Like, I think there's some catching up in people that we have to do as well. And like
hmm,
rebalance, recalibrate our friendship.
right, yeah. And I think also just like as you're listening to you talk is like, yeah, there's also like so much value in these like more situational like friendships and relationships. And then like just that like how it's like really, like two people. Like I'm not asking for like a group of 10 women, right? Like it's like, really like, it's that like, and for me, it's a little bit of like when I'm having a hard day, I want to be able to like message somebody. And, then it's interesting, like, and this is certainly my own personal story of like, that I run into, like, do I have people that like, maybe I'm not willing to open the door with them because I'm afraid of how they're going to perceive me opening the door. Like I have this story of both, like, I am either too much or
Mhm.
not enough, right? So there's this like, and then, so like if like I have, thankfully, like at this point, it's taken some work to get here because but like at this point, like my husband and my relationship is like super strong. But so
Mhm.
then it's like, well, I can't reach out to ex friend about a challenge I'm having around my partner because my relationship is in their mind, and of course, like a little bit of mine is like too good, or like
Uh-huh.
compared to theirs is better. And so there's this like, and of course, this is part, like I said, like my inner story, or like I work, functionally from an hour standpoint, I work like part time, right? So then it's almost like I can't relate to the mom who's like working in high tech and working 50 hours a week. But
Yes.
also, I can't quite connect with the stay at home mom because, like, I'm still working. So I'm not available in the same way. So there's all of these, like, and of course, so much of that is kind of like an excuse, but there's also this, like, these layers of, like, well, how do I connect with that person who's in a different situation, or like, I feel like they're judging my situation. There's just like so much of that that's like, of course, my own stories as it intersects with someone else's own stories. And I think, like, for me, that's part of what like gets in the way too of feeling like, well, I can't like share that I'm like feeling super scared about this move because my friend is like really upset that we're moving. Right. So like I feel like I can't talk to her about that because, or like that we're going to buy a new house, like, because that's a privilege that like they don't have, so there's just like, there's so many layers. And I think that it's like so easy to get stuck in those layers too, which just like fuels the isolation.
It really does. And it would be a lovely place if we could just meet human to human and be able to accept where each person is with their
Mm-hmm.
stories, with the differences in our life, because there is in this life stage that you and I are in as moms who do work part-time, there is this weird balance of
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as flexible and available as the stay-at-home moms, but I am more flexible and available than the moms that work full time. And so just trying to like connect with someone, as I'm going through my own social network, going like one of the women that I absolutely love, she works full time, drops her kids off at, daycare before school, picks them up at daycare after school. I absolutely adore her. But just scheduling, when can we connect? Because then
Right.
it's weekends and we're both trying to juggle weekends and kids and activities and partners and doing things. And it becomes this really rare thing that schedules align. As you look at it
Right.
and, oh, 4 months from now, I
Right.
have this time available. Does that work for you? And that's not a way that we can build relationships. And so we end up having a text relationship, which is fun and fine, but it also isn't filling that deeper level need,
Mm-hmm.
in person connection. And
Right.
there is something about, having some social network via text, via, online, however we want to do it. But that personal connection, I think, is really big. And
Mm-hmm.
we're not looking for 10 women. It's looking
Right.
for that one or two people that we can really connect with and really open with and be ourselves. It's not even
Mm-hmm.
like I want to, go into deep level stuff. I just want to be me and not have to worry about that you're going to judge. That
Yeah.
what are you going to think? I want that same level of like what I have with my husband, where it can be like, okay, I'm going to say something weird or do something weird. And you're going to, okay. And just go with it.
Right.
And there's not going to be an issue in the relationship. Those are those really special
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And the situational ones don't necessarily have that comfort level.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's a journey. I don't know. But I think, like, just even as we're talking about it, it's like, oh, at least I'm not the only one, right? Like, that's, and then you're like, because then maybe you're just like, who knows? Maybe this podcast is an opportunity for someone to like share it with a friend. And then they're like, maybe we, just like that,
Oh,
like, how do you plant that seed both like within, as I think about for myself, like, well, how do I plant the seed like within my peer group of like, I'm kind of looking for someone who wants to go a little bit deeper. Like, I don't, um, it's, and just like starting to plant those seeds of people that already have enough overlap. Like, it like reminds me of this, I don't know, there's an article like forever ago that it was talking about like relationships, and it was talking about one of the like keystones of developing close relationships is like frequent random interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's like if you think back to college, like how you made friends because you were in the cafeteria at the same time, you lived on the same floor, like you didn't necessarily make plan. And I think maybe that's part of where we get so stuck right now, is that like everything has to be planned. And so we don't, depending on where you live, certainly, like, and even in our like neighborhood in the city, we do have like some frequent random interactions, but it's like just not quite enough. And like I think about when I moved, like when I moved as like sort of like after grad school and as an adult, like you sort of like run into someone at the gym, and then you're like, oh, like we're at the same restaurant, and you sort of end up with these like random frequent interactions. And like that is a big part of like at least what this article said, and I've sort of feel like there's a lot of truth to that. That is where you start to build connection, because you don't have to make a plan. And I think that's where we get stuck a little bit now in this like in the way we're raising our kids and the culture that we're in, is that like we don't have opportunities for like frequent random interactions, right? Like we don't all shop at the same grocery store because we live in a city, and like I'm going to go to the one that's 2 blocks from my house and you're going to go to the one, so like you don't. And like I grew up in a small town where there was a post office. You didn't get mail delivered to your house, but like and like people went to the bank, like we just went and did things. So like you'd run into people at the bank, at the post office, at the grocery store, like, and those, and then maybe you run into them at like a kid's event. Like those frequent random interactions, I think like are so valuable, and we've sort of structured our lives in a way that like we don't have those opportunities anymore. And I think that there's something to that is like, I don't know, part of the secret sauce maybe, is that like, but how do you create that? I don't know. But just that piece of things is like we're all bonding on this shared experience, right? And everyone knows that like hardship and also then like good experiences creates relationship, but you need something more than just that. It's like we're trying to just bond on hardship, and that's like not enough in and of itself.
There are so many little ahas in what you said, in those frequent random interactions, in how so much of our younger lives, that was how we ended up socializing, because you end up in the same place and space, and it's like, oh, let's carry on. And the freedom of not having to plan, and the freedom of having more flexibility, where now we're in the space where we have work and partners and kids and all of these different scheduled things that we are working around. It's really hard to do the random, let's go do something. And we have a neighbor that's really good back and forth about, want to go get ice cream. And we try, but it's still that text of, hey, do you wanna? And then like I got one the other day and I was like, yes, except for then it's like 6:00 at night that they want to go. And then it interrupts the kids' bed and dinner. And do I feed them before or after? And there were so many thoughts around this simple text of, do you want to go get ice cream with us? That it takes away that spontaneity. It should have been, and it would have been when I was 20, either yes or no. It wouldn't have been like all this stuff that I think about through this, like, let's just go do something. And how many times does it just feel too much to even try to just go do something? And I think there's so much in that random interaction that we just really gives us more foundation to build.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting you just said that, like, came to me. I had this realization, I don't know, a few months ago, that like I spent the first, like, more or less the last 6 years in a role of like crisis mitigation and risk management. That like ultimately that is what being a mother slash parent is these days. Like, and especially for me, who's like someone who's like type A, and like, there is this, like, just like you just walked through, like, okay, can we go get ice cream? Well, no, like if I don't feed them dinner and all they eat is ice cream, then it's like this, like we're trying so hard to avoid the meltdown.
Yes.
Right. And we're trying like so hard to preserve any like small amount of time, especially as it relates to bedtime or like nap time, that like we may have to ourselves. But we like, at least for me, I found like I have spent so much time trying to avoid the meltdown, which actually like usually happens regardless of what I actually did, if I think about it. But that we're in this, like we've taken any spontaneity even out of our own day to day because we're like, I can't do that. It's going to disrupt their schedule, or I can't do that because if they don't eat this thing, or like, oh no, we can't go to that restaurant with you because my kid doesn't like anything that's to eat there. And like, but largely what we're trying to do is avoid the meltdown, right? And then if I like really think about it, like we're trying to avoid the meltdown because the meltdown doesn't make us feel good, right? And
Yes.
there's so many layers to that. Like, right, there's like the failing as a mother. Like, are they having a meltdown because I didn't feed them? And therefore, of course, like that's my fault. Or like, but there's all of this. And then like it doesn't feel good to watch your kid melting down. And what are you going to do about that? But like, I haven't, I've been trying to be better about like being like, I don't know, whatever happens is going to happen. And I'm like, there's so much of this, like we're trying to avoid the uncomfortable feelings for ourselves, really. And we're like saying it's about our kids and their sleep and their needs, but it's so much about like us. And like my daughter's preschool had a party that went, but it was scheduled for a preschool from 6 to 9. And I was like, this is bananas. Like, but I was like, okay, like we're going to go. Like, we've never, maybe one other time, like gone to an event on purpose that was not scheduled to end until 9 p.m. And like, yeah, that is way after bedtime. And like, but it was like, I mean, I don't know the parent that scheduled this. Like, I'm not sure what they were thinking, but clearly they have a little bit bigger risk tolerance than I do because they were like, this is when we're scheduling this event for. And so it just made me think like, and we went to the party and it was great. And we stayed until almost 9 o'clock. And of course at 8 o'clock, I'm like, we should really go. Like, we need to get home. And then our kids were like all of a sudden having a great time. And it was like, all right, we're going to stay. And like, was bedtime any worse than it normally is? No, it was the same. But if anything, it was a little easier because they were more tired. But like,
Uh-huh.
I think that's also part of this, like a layer of this isolation is we're so afraid of like doing it wrong or like creating this tantrum because we're like, oh God, what am I going to do when that happens? That probably gets in the way of our ability to just be like, yeah, sure, I'll do this thing that doesn't meet our family's schedule, right? But it's just interesting to think about.
I think it's huge. And maybe there are parents out there that do have that are way more flexible than what sounds what you are and I am in
Yes.
risk mitigation. I love that because and I am one that I protect bedtime like crazy because I know about myself. I need my time alone and with my partner at the end of the night. And I'm going to take that time no matter what. So if we are delayed in bedtime, that means that I'm pushed back in taking my time, then I don't go to sleep till late. Then, it keeps rolling. And there's also that worry of like, oh my gosh, and then the kids are going to be cranky and we're going to have to deal with this. And if we're in a public setting, all of those different things come in. And maybe, I think you're right, we're really trying to avoid the discomfort for ourselves. But how can we lean into that discomfort? And
Mm-hmm.
things like going to ice cream when it's like 6 o'clock and I should be putting on dinner. Instead, we're like, okay, we're just going to roll with it. And going to the party and saying, okay, we're just going to roll with it. How do we get into more of space of leaning into the discomfort and saying, we're just going to roll with it? But maybe we can lean into the discomfort and at least question the discomfort. Okay, why am I so resistant to doing this? And is there, the reward more than the risk? And
Right.
is it okay?
Yeah.
And there are definitely times where we have leaned into it and it has been a giant tantrum that we're hauling screaming kids home. And it's like, oh my gosh, why do we do this? We're never doing this again. And there are times where, yeah, they're really exhausted and they're going to go to bed really easy.
Right. But you never know which situation is coming, right?
Right.
Like,
And,
that's the hard part to sit with is you're like, it could go terribly and it could go really well. And like, can I sit with it if it goes terribly, right? That's, that's the human experience trying to
and
avoid being uncomfortable.
exactly. And I think it's coming to in this moment, can I sit with that if it goes terribly?
Mm-hmm.
If there's a yes, then like roll with it.
Right. And if you're like, I don't have capacity, I had a hard day at work, like I can't do that, then like, yeah,
It's okay to say
it's
no,
okay too. Yeah. Yeah.
right? I think just being okay with where we are and being okay with whatever choice we make.
I think like, you shared like before we got on is this like happiness curve and like that there is a, just acknowledging that like there is a time, like my husband and I have talked about this, like there is a time that your relationship is going to like not be good, right? And just like there is this time and like that like there is isolation, that there is transition, that there is like, but just trying to like, and easier said than done always, but this like, okay, what if we just leaned into like accepting that like, yeah, it's both the balance of like, yeah, it's gonna feel isolating and like that's okay, but I'm gonna come out the other side, right? I think that's like the desperation is where certainly I found myself get stuck of like, I'm never gonna have that again, and just like leaning into like, yeah, it's gonna happen, for how long and at what intensity and what degree. But if like we can just like trust that it's like gonna be okay, that you're going that like, and even as I say that like I'm going to find these people to connect with, that like, what if I just ride this wave of like feeling a little isolated, then it doesn't feel so scary, right?
I think that is incredibly powerful in that there are going to be times in our relationships that suck, that are really hard, that are not fun. And there are going to be times in our relationships that are really good and we're going to feel really connected in all relationships. And
Yeah.
that part of the human, experience in that ebbs and flows. And I think what I really picked up, which really lit up in my head, was that desperation is where you really feel stuck. Because that's those moments where I'm really feeling that desperation to change whatever. I want it to change now. I want the deep relationships now. I want whatever it is now. That's where I feel the most stuck, the most anxious. And we can either sit with that or lean into it, which may then topple into a shift of somehow. But
Right.
even if we sit with it, it's going to ebb and flow and something's going to change. That's part of, our existence, is things are going to change. And I love just giving yourself the space to say, okay, I'm really uncomfortable right now. And it's going to change.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you for this amazing conversation. I've absolutely loved talking with you. I want to say thank you so much for joining. Hey, before you go, just a little bit of legal. This podcast is designed for educational purposes only. It is not to replace any expert advice from your doctors, therapists, coaches, or any other professional that you would work with. It's just a chat with a friend, me, where we get curious about ideas, thoughts, and things that are going on in our lives. And as we're talking about friends, if you know someone who would benefit from the conversation today, please share, because I think the more that we open up these conversations, the more benefit we all get. So until next time, give yourself a big hug from me and stay curious, because that's the fun in this world.